everybody. I hope that you're well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on restrictive and non restrictive elements. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca, with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts. We're doing grade 7. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of restrictive and non-restrictive elements. All right, so when it comes to non-restrictive, actually, before we go to non-restrictive elements or elements, we said our chapter is restrictive and non-restrictive elements. Our subject is English Language Arts. We're doing grade 7. And then the lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of restrictive and non-restrictive elements, it is, what does the punctuation suggest? So what does the punctuation suggest? As well as commas with non-restrictive elements. So what does the punctuation suggest? And we're doing commas with non-restrictive elements. So that is going to be our lessons for today under our chapter of restrictive and non-restrictive elements. All right. So when it comes to our restrictive and non-restrictive elements, right, you notice that unlike non-restrictive elements, restrictive elements are not offset by commas. So we notice that restrictive elements are not offset by commas. It's not offset by commas. So now the question is, what are non-restrictive elements? And non-restrictive elements are not necessary. So non-restrictive elements are not necessary for identifying the noun that comes before them. They simply serve to add extra information about the noun. So that is non-restrictive elements. It's like it basically they add extra information about the noun. And we said non-restrictive elements are not necessary for identifying the noun. So we're not identifying the noun that comes before them, but they simply serve to add extra information about the noun. All right. So we say that non-restrictive elements as well as restrictive elements, it is not, or non-restrictive elements, it's not necessarily for identifying the nouns, but they simply just serve to add something extra or extra information about the noun. So they add extra information about the noun. And when it comes to restrictive, right, a restrictive clause, it modifies the noun. That is what we can say. Restrictive nouns, it modifies the noun. And that is why we say with non-restrictive elements, right, it's basically extra information about the noun. And if you look at the word restrictive, restricted, that already gives us an idea that it is limited, right? So restrictive nouns or restrictive clauses, they limit or identify such nouns, and it cannot be removed from a sentence without changing the sentence's meaning. And we're going to look at examples soon. All right. So that is basically, we say that restrictive clauses, if we even look at the word restrictive, it is limited, right? It's a clause that limit or identify the nouns and it cannot be removed from a sentence unless we're going to change the whole sentence's meaning. And then we say the non-restrictive clause, it describes a noun in a non-essential way. It is not necessarily for identifying the noun, but they simply add extra information about the noun. That is non-restrictive and restrictive. Are you asking about maths? Are you asking about the math class? The math class is live currently. So it's both this class as well as the grade 5 math class is live currently. All right, so now let's go to aplusstudents.ca and we're going to look at more examples on restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. We're going to see what does the punctuation suggest, that is mainly like your commas and so on, and commas with non-restrictive elements. So now we're going to the first lesson that says, what does the punctuation suggest? All right. So we said that restrictive clauses, they modify the noun that precedes it in an essential way, whereas non-restrictive clauses, right, it describes a noun in a non-essential way. And we said restrictive clauses, they are limited, right? Whereas non-restrictive clauses, they are not limited. But now we're going to look at what the following sentences suggest. All right, if you look at the first one that says, what does the following sentence suggest? It says, according to the law, or according to law, foods that have been produced and processed according to certain government standards are allowed to bear the USDA, which is the United States Department of Agriculture organic label, right? So that is according to law, foods that have been produced and processed according to certain government standards are allowed to bear the USDA organic label to basically give us an idea that the food is organic, right? So now we need to basically see what does the punctuation, what does the following sentence suggest? So it basically says that they have been produced and processed according to the certain government standards. It is not set off with commas. As you can see, we don't even have one comma basically in that sentence, right? Straightforward. So which means that that is not set off by any commas. So if it's not set off by any commas, right, then we can say it is restrictive and it narrows down the identity of foods. So the sentence suggests that only certain foods are allowed to bear the USD organic label. And it is not set off by any commas. That is restrictive. So which means that only certain foods are allowed to bear the USDA organic label. So now we're going on to the next one. It says the guest lecturer, there we have a comma, Mary Yamada, will address the following question. Would high speed rail solve America's transportation problem? And there it is restricted by commas, or it's set off by commas. And says Mary Yamada, which is the person that is addressing whoever, like the guest lecturer, that is set off with commas because now they're putting emphasis on who the guest lecturer is. And when we say that they're putting emphasis on who the guest lecturer is, it gives us a clear idea that there's only one guest lecturer. Because if they hadn't said Mary Yamada, then we would have gotten the idea that there could have been more than one guest lecturer. But here they're specifically talking about Mary Yamada, who is the only guest lecturer that we know of. And it says Mary Yamada is set off by commas, and setting off by commas gives us an idea that they're basically indicating to us that she is the only guest lecturer, and that is non restrictive. So even if we were to remove the commas from Mary Yamada, right? Even if we were to remove the commas over here, then the identity of the guest lecturer would still be clear. So it would be with or without the commas. The identity of the guest lecturer would be clear. That is why we're saying it's non restrictive. The next one says, what does the following sentence suggest? It says, next month, the Cedarbrook Parks Department will remove elm trees that have been diagnosed with Dutch elm disease in an effort to prevent the fungus from spreading to other trees. And if we look at that sentence, we need to say if it's restrictive or non restrictive. And so far, we have a comma as well as over here, which means that it is not set off by commas, right? Other than the commas being there, but it is not really set off by commas. And we say that this sentence is restrictive. And the reason why it's restrictive because it narrows down the reason why the trees are going to be removed. They're also giving us the reason or the identity of the elm trees. It also narrows down, as in, like we said, the reason why we're cutting it off or removing the trees due to the fact that the elm trees have the Dutch elm disease. So, which means that it is restrictive and it narrows down the reasons for the trees that is going to be removed because the elm trees have the Dutch elm disease. Right, so which means that some of the elm trees they have Dutch disease. And now, if we look at our sentences, right, we have different sentences that basically will give us an idea if it is set off by commas or if it's not set off with commas. And when it is restricted, then it gives us an idea that the reason why it's restrictive is because they're putting emphasis on the reason why something is being done. All right. So now we're going to our test, right? Where we need to say what does the punctuation suggest? It says the concert attendees who ordered tickets in advance may enter the arena as early as 4 p.m. So the concert attendees who ordered tickets in advance may enter the arena as early as 4 p.m. And if we look at that sentence, right, now we need to say what does that sentence suggest? Does it suggest option one that all concert attendees ordered tickets in advance? Or does it mean option two that some concert attendees did not order tickets in advance? What does it mean? So, option one or option two? And if we were to choose the correct option, this is not restricted by any commas, and it means that some concert attendees did not order tickets in advance. Especially since they're saying the concert attendees who ordered tickets in advance may enter as early as 4 p.m., which means that if you did not book any tickets online, you need to stand in the line from 4 p.m. and buy your tickets. All right, the next one says the exhibit that displays about 1,500 dinosaurs' bones is a popular attraction at the Aquaria Exhibit Hall in Dinosaur National Monument. And if we look at that sentence, we need to say, what does it suggest? Does it suggest that option one, there is more than one exhibit at the query exhibit hall? Or does it mean option two, the display of dinosaur bones is the only exhibit at the query exhibit hall? It says the exhibit that displays about 1,500 dinosaurs' bones is a popular attraction at the Query Exhibit Hall in Dinosaur National Monument. We need to say, is it option one, there's more than one exhibit at the Query Exhibit Hall? Or do we say the display of dinosaur bones is the only exhibit at the Query Exhibit Hall? And if we look at what that following suggests, then we can say option one, that there are more than one exhibit at the Query Exhibit Hall. Option one. All right. The next one says Mr. Mason continued his annual tradition of inviting friends over for a 4th of July hootenanny at his vacation home, which is on the Russian River near Forestville. So Mr. Mason continued his annual tradition of inviting friends over for 4th of July hootenanny at his vacation home, which is on the Russian River near Forestville. So now we need to say, what does the following sentence suggest? Does it suggest that Mr. Mason has only one vacation home? Option one. Or does it suggest that Mr. Mason has more than one vacation home? Option two. So we need to say, is it option one, Mr. Mason only has one family home, vacation home, or do we say option two, he has more than one vacation home? And the wording that tells us that he only has one vacation home is where they say that at his vacation home. It is not restricted by any commas. So option one should be correct. All right. All right. And then here it says next month, the Cedarburg Parks Department will remove elm trees that have been diagnosed with Dutch elm disease in an effort to prevent the fungus from spreading to other trees. We now need to say, is it option one, some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease, or all of them have Dutch elm disease? We need to choose the correct option. Some trees, or some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease, or all of the trees have Dutch elm disease. We need to say which one is correct. And if we were to choose the correct option, we would say only some, because they're specifically saying there that in an effort to prevent fungus from spreading to other trees, which means that only some of the elm trees have Dutch elm disease. All right. And then one more, it says, we need to say, what does the following sentence suggest? It says, put the cherries that are bruised or soft in this container. Bonnie instructed her assistants in the kitchen. We can use them to make jam. We need to say what that sentence suggests. Does it suggest that all of it is bruised, or only some of the cherries are bruised or soft? All right, and if we were to select the correct option, then we would say option two, that only some of the cherries are bruised or soft. Because I said place Put the cherries that are bruised or soft in the container. They didn't say put all of the bruised or soft cherries in the container. So only some are bruised or soft. All right. Now we're going to choose the commas with restrictive elements. It says that if the relative clause is bold, in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with a comma. Then we need to set it off with a comma. If it is restrictive, submit the text without making any changes. So if it is non-restrictive, we need to set it off with a comma. But if it is restrictive, we need to submit the text without making any changes. And it says, rather than using a traditional rock and roll band for entertainment, the state fair organizers decided to hire a hip hop group that had performed at the local arts festival earlier that year. And if we look at that sentence, right, especially the one that says the clause that says that had performed at the local arts festival early this year or that year. And if we were to choose the correct, it says the relative clause that had that had performed at the local arts festival earlier that year, it is restrictive. The information is needed to narrow down the hip hop group being discussed. So they're basically telling us that the hip hop group they performed already. So do not set it off with do not set it off. Do not set it off the relative clause with a comma. All right, so let us go to a test where we're going to say if it's commas with non-restrictive elements. And it says if the relative clause in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with a comma. If it is restrictive, if it's non-restrictive, set it off with a comma. But if it's restrictive, submit the text without making any changes. It says at its height, the Inca Empire, which controlled some 10 million people, was the largest empire in the world. So now we need to say which one is correct, option 1 or option 2. And if we look at that sentence, right, then we need to basically add commas over here. So it being restrictive or non-restrictive, and set it off with commas. So it's option 2. Ah, it is option 2. All right, let's choose one more and then we are done. Oh, it's option 1. Or option 2 is correct. Time, it says, if the opposite, is it if the oppositive, if the positive is bold, in bold is non-restrictive, set it off with commas. If it is restrictive, submit the text without making any changes. It says, diamonds, precious gems renowned for their dazzling sparkle, are formed when carbon atoms undergo extreme pressure at high temperature, usually around 100 miles below the surface of the Earth. And if we were to choose the correct option, then I feel like this should be set off with commas. Diamonds. Because here they say diamonds, right? We could have just said diamonds are formed when carbon atoms undergo extreme pressure at high temperatures, but now we are still saying what diamonds are. Precious gems renowned for their dazzling sparkle. So which means that this is set off with a comma. So we'll go with option 1. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on restrictive and non-restrictive elements. Thank you very much for joining the class, and I really hope you're going to have a good evening further. Goodbye.